Firstly, David, thanks very much for talking to Energy Live News. Now, this book, Electricity Supply, the British Experiment, what exactly gave you the idea to write it? I mean, are you just getting bored of retirement?
I wanted to get a few things off my chest in connection with energy policy. That was important to me. Things that I possibly wouldn't have been able to have said in my former job. But also to tell a story of how the association that I worked for grew in quite an interesting way from very humble beginnings, and also to refer to the people that made things happen. There are a lot of wonderful people in the association that did a great job and largely unacknowledged, and I wanted that to come over as well.
And you talk about the British experiment. What do you mean when you say experiment?
I chose that expression deliberately because when I used to go over to Brussels just after the electricity privatisation to speak at conferences and meetings about electricity liberalisation, the people in mainland Europe generally hated what I had to say. They did not like the sound of it at all. And they used to refer to what we were doing as the British experiment. And I would say, let me make one thing clear. This is not an experiment. It's happening, it's going to go ahead, it will succeed. And of course, that's how things started, but after many years, I look back now and see how what was in mind at privatisation has been changed so much that those people that remember calling it an experiment could well say to me, yes, we told you it was an experiment. You've deviated from it quite significantly.
Do you think that you agree that it was an experiment that perhaps has gone wrong?
We found that although the state no longer owned the electricity industry, the politicians, encouraged by lots of different lobbies, I ought to say, discovered that they could make it do things, and they could make it dance to their tune. And they became quite excited by that, and there was one thing after another that they started asking the industry to do. And the outcome of that, of course, is not good, and the politicians forgot what the privatisation was all about, and they focused on other things, and we ended up with something that is totally different from what was originally intended.
So government interference, one of the big themes in your book, I would say, and you say at different points, today too much is attempted and too much is done badly, and you're talking about both the EU and the UK there, and you also say electricity supply is too important to be in the hands of politicians. Now, what do you mean by that?
I didn't put it quite as categorically as that. I think I probably said something like, after a couple of glasses of wine, I could conclude that electricity supply is too important to be in the hands of politicians. At the time of privatisation, of course, the opponents of privatisation used to say electricity supply is too important to have in the hands of a private industry. I have to say that what the politicians have done over the years has caused quite a few problems in the nature of unintended consequences. What they've sought to do has always been with the best of intentions, and I put that in as a sort of subtitle to the book, but there are always unintended consequences, and one seems to have piled upon another until we've reached a point where we don't have a state industry anymore, but we don't have a fully open privatised industry either. It's something between the two, and it's certainly not what was intended initially, and it's giving us quite a few problems. Those problems include higher costs, helping to increase prices, higher cost of capital, I think, and concern about the stability of policy, which has led to the current shortage of generating capacity, which we've got to face for a few years.
David, aren't you also partly to blame? I mean, why didn't you put your hand up at the time and say, politicians, do you know what, thanks for the input, but you're actually tinkering a bit too much?
I feel partly to blame, and I think somewhere in the book I sort of admit that, but I think the industry is definitely to blame as well. It should really, at certain points, have said, hold on to the politicians. And by the way, it's not a one-party thing. It's all of the parties are in the dock over this. It should have said, look, if you do this, here is the outcome as we see it. Or if you go on chopping and changing your mind about things, you're going to find that the people that need to put up enormous sums of money to invest in the industry are going to lose confidence. And in fact, there are paragraphs in the book where it's quite clear that I and the association, and indeed the companies, were saying things like that, but possibly not loudly enough. And also, one of the difficulties was that people would probably have reacted on the lines of, oh, they would say that, wouldn't they? These are wicked, evil companies that are ripping us off. There was no trust in the industry. And that's caused extra problems. In other words, it's not a very nice thing to work in an industry which actually does a good job, but isn't liked and isn't trusted. But there are knock-on effects from that. If the industry's got something serious to say, it's actually more difficult for it to say it and be believed, and that's got to get sorted out.
So when it comes to communication, do you think anything can be done to salvage energy in the public's good books?
It's a very, very steep hill to climb, and you've got 25 years of problems to overcome, and 25 years of misunderstandings as well. So it can only be a slow process. I wouldn't trust anybody that said that they could come in and fix it in the course of a year. And unfortunately, the process is fraught with risks. You can have the best laid plans for developing trust and rebuilding reputation, but things can go wrong so quickly. And I think somewhere in the book I say, it's a bit like snakes and ladders, that you go up the ladder very slowly, but if you land on a snake, you go down very fast. And somebody's only got to do something silly on a quiet news day, and an energy story is on the front pages of the newspapers, and you slip back. So the work to rebuild trust has got to be unrelenting. The industry's got to be transparent. It's got to somehow get over to the world better than it has done, the good things that it does. I remember when a major power station in the Midlands broke down. It was actually a health and safety issue at the time, and I got drawn into it. And I remember the local radio station there ringing me to say, is the power in, it was Nottingham, is the power in Nottingham going to go off because of this? Well, no, of course it isn't. We've got an integrated system which is used to having power stations come on and go off all the time, and with one here and there we can cope with it. But they didn't get that, and these were intelligent people.
So you've talked about the competition in the industry and towards the end of the book, and the competition review that we've got at the moment from regulators. And at the time, you say, at about 2013, that looking back, when you see that you argued against that sort of a thing, you said, looking back, it was a mistake to have done so, and we should have said, bring it on. So do you think that the competition review, what would you like to see from it?
I would like to think that the Competition and Markets Authority will find that by and large things are okay. I didn't come across any dodgy practices in the time that I was working in the industry, and we were exactly in the position where you might have expected to find them. If there had been a big competition investigation, I guess they would have come to the trade association quite quickly. We had rules, of course, about what could and could not be discussed, and people were reminded of them every now and again. Nothing of that kind ever went wrong. But the whole thing has become a bit political. It's rather like we're going to give you a fair trial and then a first-class hanging. And I feel a bit uncomfortable with it at the moment, and I hope that the Competition Commission will find that things do work by and large in the industry. And also a rather personal view of it, and one that I somehow doubt that the Competition and Markets Authority will get to grips with, is that although the politicians talk the talk about competition, they don't always walk the walk. And they've done countless things over the years that have diminished the importance of a competitive market. They want there to be a competitive market, but on the other hand, they are apt to say, by the way, we don't want you to use that technology, we want you to use those, and then at times change their minds about such things. We've seen coal be strongly in favour and then go out of favour. We've seen nuclear out of favour and come strongly into favour. We've seen intentions to be the greenest government ever, and then we've heard references to this green crap from a very high level. People, when they stand back from the industry, ought to be able to see that the competition that there was intended to be at the beginning, and there was, of course, eventually, has been diminished. And should governments really be saying to customers, we think you've got too much choice in tariffs? Should they be saying, we think your energy bills ought to look like this or that? Or, that's not the way it was meant to be. So I hope that the Competition and Markets Authority will say, yes, we've got a competitive market, but it could be made awfully better if government wasn't forever coming in and messing about with it. I somehow doubt that that's going to happen.
Which do you think of the many, many that you will have known over the years was the best energy secretary?
Oh, that it would be unfair. But there have been a few that I thought were a waste of space, and a small number that were excellent. I was dismayed at times at the way that governments treated the role of Energy Minister. They came and they went rather rapidly, and it's unsettling for the industry and not very healthy.
So we've talked a little bit about political interference, and you obviously think there's a bit too much. Going into the next general election, which we've obviously got coming up this year, we've had a lot of promises from politicians. Ed Miliband, for example, saying that if Labour comes to power, it'll scrap Ofgem, the regulator, it will put a freeze on energy prices and even take us back to the pool for electricity. What would you like to see going into the next general election when it comes to energy?
Wouldn't it be good if the whole thing became a bit less political than it is? The politics of it today are seriously damaging to the industry. I always feared that while we were saying to the politicians, please may we have clarity and stability so that we can invest, they didn't get it. And if investment didn't take place, the world would turn on somebody and blame them. Maybe the government of the day, but they're quite good at deflecting that, and of course they go out of office every now and again, so they can always point to their predecessors. Maybe the regulator, but I always thought that there was a horrible risk that the industry would get blamed for not investing, and I think that would be dreadfully unfair. The conditions for investment have been made very confusing, and I certainly wouldn't like to see that happen. But we've all got politicians, investors, energy companies, customers, if you like, have all got to get on the same page, because in the end, we want pretty well the same things.
So what do you hope that this book will achieve?
I hope that it will bring a bit more understanding about how we got to where we are. I hope that people will look a bit more kindly upon the industry that I used to work in.
David, do you ever miss energy? And if somebody offered you a chief executive role and said, we really want you, come back now, would you snap it up?
It's not possible to be deeply involved in the industry day to day for 25 years and then suddenly switch off completely and not be interested. Quite apart from anything else, it's actually a very interesting industry. And when I first retired, my wife used to get cross with me because issues would come up on the Today programme or on the TV. And I would feel like as if I were responsible and I ought to be doing something, and I had to be reminded that it was not my responsibility anymore. So I remain very interested, but no, I would not want to be a full-time trade association head. Thank you.